Hello friends, welcome to my channel Creating Essence. I am Megan and I'm so glad you're here today. Today I'm sharing with you all a little bit about me. I have mentioned a few times in a few videos that I am hard of hearing. I get questions about this a lot, as well as why we do things like American Sign Language so intently in our homeschool. So I figured I would share my personal story about that. Well, from the start, from what I've been told, is when I was an infant, I had a lot of ear infections. My parents were told that my eustachian tubes, which are the tubes running from the inner ear down into the throat to drain the ear, didn't work properly, so my ears couldn't drain. As a result, for 2 years solid, I was on a prophylactic antibiotic, which basically just means the doctors put me on antibiotics because they knew I was always going to have an ear infection if I wasn't on an antibiotic. Once my body was a little bit bigger and I was around 4 or 5 years old, they were able to take me off of that. But I've always had chronic ear infections. Even through my teen years, I had ear infections. When I was 17, I chose to have tubes put in my ears, and that did help for a time, but they eventually came out. Another thing I dealt with as a child was auditory processing issues. When I was 10, I was told I needed hearing aids because my hearing was so bad. And when my parents took me to an audiologist to have that addressed on the recommendation from the ENT, the audiologist said, she actually can hear pretty well. It's just that it takes time for her brain to recognize that she has heard. And that's true. Back then it didn't have a name. Now that has a pretty standard diagnosis of auditory processing disorder. Basically meaning sounds come in and it just takes some time for your brain to recognize, organize, and sort out what it's heard. Things like background noise and stuff make that much, much more difficult. Even today, if I am in a crowded room, most conversation, unless someone knows about my struggles and is pointedly standing close to me or speaking toward one of my ears, most of the time I'm just smiling and nodding out of politeness because it gets really tiring to say, what? What? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. All the time. All the time. And people get really annoyed with you. Really annoyed because, you know, me struggling to hear them is an inconvenience to them. I've never found a way of dealing with the auditory processing aside from being aware. My husband kind of chuckles when he can say something to me. There's lapse between when he stops speaking and when I seem to come to attention and respond to him because my brain has realized that it's heard something and needs to respond. I watch television with closed captioning on because with having a house full of kids and just general noise, I can't really understand what they're saying on TV. So I turn on closed captioning. Another issue that I deal with is a result of all those ear infections as a kid. I have scar tissue on my eardrums from so many ruptured eardrums when I was a kid because rapidly the fluid buildup would just get to be too much in my ears because they weren't draining properly and my eardrum would rupture. And if you know much about how hearing works, sounds come in and basically vibrate on the eardrum and your brain sorts out those vibrations. My eardrums don't vibrate as well with lots of scar tissue on them. I have also discovered in my adulthood that I have what's called Meniere's disease. Meniere's disease is a disorder of the inner ear. It has lots of different ways it affects people, but the 4 main ways are it causes vertigo, it causes ringing in the ears, hearing loss, and then a feeling of like really full ears, like your ears need to pop and they won't pop or it gets super painful. I have had all those issues since I was a kid, but nobody ever recognized it for what it was. They just thought I was one of those kids who got lots of ear infections. And all the other issues were just kind of passed off as being part of that. Now I also have at least one family member, my maternal grandmother, with Meniere's disease. So in my family, that is hereditary. I've seen so many hearing specialists, audiologists, ear, nose, and throat specialists over the years, and none of them have really made any huge connections as to whether or not Meniere's disease and auditory processing are truly connected. Eustachian tube dysfunction as a kid had anything to do with that, or if I was just born with ears that are a cocktail of issues. For most people, Meniere's disease does not come on until midlife, usually 40 or later. I have had it since childhood. When Meniere's disease is something that comes on earlier in life like that, it is typically something that ultimately results in profound deafness. I know that now, but I did not know that when I was a kid. I didn't even know what Meniere's disease was. I did know since I was a little kid that I love sign language. My mom spent one summer working at a camp for the deaf and learned some basic signed exact English. So I picked up on things there and learned my alphabet, things like that. But when I went to college, I had the opportunity to have a dual degree in the early childhood education that I wanted, but also in an area of special education. And I chose American Sign Language. I absolutely loved it. And getting immersed in the deaf culture that we had the opportunity to be so close to up in Rochester, New York was just fantastic. When people talk about people who are deaf or hard of hearing not having a quality of life, I just kind of laugh. Have you ever even been in the deaf community? If you had, I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't think that anymore. Because that was my passion in college, I naturally started teaching my oldest sign language when she was a baby, and we just kind of continued with each of the kids. Now that we're well into school years and my oldest is in junior high, I have become really intently working on it as a foreign language for my kids. I guess it's sort of selfishly motivated in that I always want to be able to communicate with my kids. American Sign Language is the language of deaf people in North America. It's a federally recognized language. It is recognized as a foreign language for students who want to study it. And I'm really passionate about American Sign Language and deaf culture. Aside from just always wanting to be able to communicate with my kids, given that the scientific odds are I will be profoundly deaf at some point. I also know what it's like to be, I guess you could say, marginalized because of a disability. Most people don't know that I'm hard of hearing. When I say anything about it, people are like, really? I never would have guessed. I've met so many people who have asked questions like, what about hearing aids? What about cochlear implants? For me, hearing aids aren't a great option because my auditory processing is at play as well. And the stimuli of just every sound being magnified in my ear doesn't help. There may come a time when I do need that magnification, but cochlear implants, they'll never be an option for me. There are a lot of ethical reasons that people get into regarding cochlear implants, but ultimately it should be a person's choice because their body function is being modified permanently. A lot of people who choose cochlear implants completely reject ASL and anything of the like because they consider themselves in the hearing world and not having use of that lesser language. I've had the privilege of really getting to know and feel, I guess, both sides of the fences, the hearing world and being immersed in the deaf culture in my college years. It just makes me feel sad for people. It's different, yeah, and it's hard. Goodness, I can't even watch TV with people without causing annoyance. And loud volume on music, like constantly asking people to repeat themselves in conversation or only getting bits and pieces of what people are saying. So I teach my kids American Sign Language and about the deaf culture, not only because I want to be able to communicate with them, but also because I don't want them to be part of the problem. I don't want them to, without having any ill intent, that this is somehow lesser. It's different. Might be a little inconvenient. You might have to make some accommodations for me if you actually want to be my friend and hang out with me much. Because you'll figure out pretty quickly I've got some quirks in regards to my hearing and understanding. I talk really loud in a quiet room because I don't know that I'm talking loud. I laugh loud. I even walk loud. But I'm really grateful for the people in my life who love me for me and meet me where I'm at instead of requiring that I change myself to accommodate them, the people who don't struggle. If you all have any questions, I would love to hear about them. Over the years, I have found that a dairy-free diet is best for me, and that does affect how my ears work, believe it or not. Something about dairy thickens secretions and my ears don't drain as well. And when my ears don't drain, I can't hear as well, which is pretty bad. When I'm talking really loud or saying what a lot, or singing really off key, my husband has learned to say, "Are your allergies really bad today? Did you eat some ice cream?" Because he's been around long enough to know that's probably the source of the issue. I'm really grateful for people like that who stick it out, deal with those little things because they know that I'm worth that little bit of extra work. Thank you all for hanging out with me today, my friends. If you have any questions about ASL resources that we use for our kids in our homeschool and our family life, put them in the comments box below. I would love to hear about it and answer those for you. If you have any questions about anything, I would love to answer them. Put those down there as well. And as always, my friends, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to hang out with us for some more. We'll see you again soon.